The long drive back to Daniel's hometown stretched through endless fields and quiet roads, the kind that forced silence between two people who no longer knew what to say. Emily rested her hand on the window, watching raindrops trace delicate rivers across the glass. Daniel's attention stayed on the road, his jaw clenched, his tie loosened just enough to suggest exhaustion rather than comfort. They were visiting his father for the first time in over a year. A reunion neither had particularly wanted but both felt obligated to attend. When the iron gates of Richard Caldwell's estate came into view, Emily's stomach tightened. The house, bathed in the soft orange hue of the setting sun, looked regal and ancient, ivy crawling up stone walls like veins. The kind of house that seemed to breathe with secrets. Richard stood at the door before they even parked, tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair catching the last light. His smile was too perfect, too composed, like a man auditioning for warmth. "Emily," he said, stepping forward and taking her hand with unexpected gentleness. "It's been too long. You look radiant." She smiled politely, murmuring thanks, her pulse quickening at his voice. Low, deliberate, the kind that seemed to weigh every word before releasing it. Daniel hugged his father stiffly. "You didn't have to wait outside." Richard's smile flickered. Family deserves a proper welcome. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and red wine. The dining room was set with precision, silver cutlery gleaming, candles lit though daylight still lingered. Emily noticed the symmetry. 3 chairs, 3 glasses, everything in its perfect place, except for the tension hovering between the men. Dinner began with shallow laughter and 4 stories about Daniel's job. Richard listened politely, swirling his wine, but his gaze drifted toward Emily more than once. She felt it, that weight, that silent attention. It wasn't overtly inappropriate, just aware, the way one might study a painting, curious about what lies beneath the brushstrokes. "So," Richard said, turning to her, "Daniel tells me you started painting again." Emily blinked. "Yes, just small things. Landscapes mostly." "Small things are often what last," he said, raising his glass slightly. "People underestimate the quiet details." Daniel smiled awkwardly. "Dad used to say that about everything, including business deals." Richard chuckled. "And it kept the company alive, didn't it?" The exchange carried an edge that Emily couldn't quite name. She sensed old wounds buried under their polite tones, years of pride and disappointment locked in ritual civility. As the meal went on, conversation drifted. Richard asked questions no one else ever did. Not about her work or friends, but about her, about the places she'd loved as a child, the things she feared. It was disarming. Daniel seemed relieved to have the focus off himself, unaware how Richard's gaze lingered, how his voice softened when he spoke her name. By dessert, the wine had dulled the room into warmth. Emily laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. Richard told a story from his youth, about a fire in the stables that nearly burned the whole property down. "I was 16, he said, his eyes fixed on the candlelight. "My father saved the horses, but lost his hands to the flames. Every day afterward, he told me that beauty and danger always come together." Something in his tone chilled her, the way he looked at her after saying it. Calm, knowing, almost a warning. Later, while Daniel helped clear the table, Richard handed Emily her coat. Their fingers brushed. It was brief, accidental, and yet she felt the spark travel up her arm like static. He didn't move away immediately. His gaze stayed unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "This house is quieter than it should be." For a moment, she didn't know if he was talking about the house or himself. On the drive to the guest house, Daniel hummed softly, lost in thought. Emily stared out at the darkened trees. Her reflection ghosted in the window. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that the spark she felt was just loneliness misread as curiosity. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face in the candlelight, the way his words lingered like a promise or a threat. That night, as rain began again against the roof, Emily dreamed of fire and of someone watching from across the table, waiting for her to look back. The rain hadn't stopped since their first night. It drummed softly against the windows of Richard's mansion, a rhythm that seemed to fill the silence Daniel left behind. Each evening, he drove into town to meet investors and board members, eager to prove himself to the company his father had built. Each evening, Emily stayed behind, at first reading by the fire, later finding herself in the kitchen where Richard always appeared, uninvited yet expected. It began innocently. A shared meal when Daniel texted that he'd be late. A glass of wine. Then another. The air between them thickened with something unspoken. Not yet dangerous, but undeniably alive. "You don't have to wait up for him every night," Richard said one evening, setting a plate of roasted chicken before her. "He's his mother's son, married to his work." Emily smiled faintly. "I suppose ambition runs in the family." Richard's eyes lingered. "It ruined mine once." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. But the way he said mine low, weighted, pulled something inside her. She'd spent months feeling invisible, a quiet echo in her own marriage. Richard saw through her stillness like it was glass. Over the next few days, their interactions grew into a rhythm neither acknowledged. He'd find her in the library sketching, bringing her tea without being asked. He'd compliment the smallest details, the curve of her handwriting, the softness in her voice when she read aloud. It was delicate, deliberate. "You draw like someone who's afraid to be seen," he said once, studying a half-finished landscape. She hesitated. "Maybe I am." He smiled. "Fear makes art honest." It wasn't the words that caught her. It was the way he said them, gently, as if he understood something Daniel never had. One afternoon, she found herself waiting for his footsteps. When he appeared, she pretended surprise, her breath catching before she could hide it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Richard poured 2 glasses of wine and sat opposite her at the long oak table. "You make this house feel awake again," he said. Emily looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to." "Most beautiful things happen by accident," he replied, his lips curving into that slow, knowing smile, the one that felt like both an invitation and a warning. Silence followed. The fire crackled, casting shadows that stretched across his face. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The world outside seemed to pause, caught in that thin line between restraint and surrender. She told herself to look away, to remember Daniel, to remember who this man was, his father, for God's sake. But when she did look away, she could still feel his gaze, steady and unashamed. "I should turn in," she murmured finally, her voice breaking the stillness. He stood as she rose, stepping close enough that she could smell the faint trace of whiskey and cedar. "Good night, Emily," he said softly. Her name on his tongue felt different, heavier, claimed. That night, in the guest house, she lay awake long after Daniel returned. He spoke briefly about his meeting, his voice distant, already half asleep. Emily stared at the ceiling, her pulse refusing to calm. The sound of rain outside reminded her of Richard's voice, deep and measured, like thunder that never quite broke. By morning, she promised herself it would stop, that she'd keep her distance. But when she came down for breakfast, Richard was already at the table, newspaper folded neatly beside his coffee. He looked up and smiled. The rain came harder that night than it had all week, sheets of water slamming against the glass, lightning flaring white across the windows. Daniel was still in the city, a meeting that couldn't be postponed, though Emily doubted he'd even noticed how long she'd stopped waiting for him. The house groaned with the wind, its old bones shivering. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 9, each chime echoing like a warning. Emily sat in the library, sketchbook open, candlelight trembling. She told herself she'd go to bed soon. She told herself not to listen for footsteps. But when she heard them, slow, deliberate, moving toward the door, her body tensed anyway. Richard appeared, holding 2 glasses of wine. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be alone on a night like this," he said. "I'm fine," she replied softly, eyes dropping to her sketch. "Are you?" He set the glasses down, leaning on the table. "You've been drawing the same thing for days. The rain, the trees, the distance. It's beautiful but sad." She forced a smile. "Maybe that's how I feel." He watched her for a long time, so long that the silence between them became something alive. Then, without another word, he reached for her sketchbook. Their fingers brushed. The contact was small, but her pulse jumped like a struck chord. "Emily!" He said quietly, her name like a confession. She shook her head. Don't. He didn't move closer, but the space between them seemed to collapse anyway. Outside, thunder cracked, startling her. The candle flickered, its flame thinning into a whisper. I know this is wrong, she whispered. So do I, he said. But wrong things don't always feel wrong at first. The words hung there, dangerous, delicate, inevitable. And then he kissed her. It was not rushed, not hungry, but slow and deliberate, as if both knew this was a point of no return. The rain outside grew louder, like applause for something long in the making. When they finally pulled apart, she stood trembling, eyes wide, breath uneven. We can't, she said, though she didn't step away. Then tell me to stop, he murmured. She didn't. What followed was silence and storm, the kind that consumes everything around it. The world outside vanished, the air filled with heat and the scent of rain leaking through the window. For one night, she forgot who she was, who he was, what it would cost. When morning came, the rain had stopped. The light that filtered through the curtains was pale and unforgiving. Emily woke first. Richard was still asleep beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as if afraid she might disappear. The guilt hit her like cold water. She sat up, covering her face, the reality of what they'd done sinking into her skin like ink. She dressed quietly, avoiding the mirror. The floorboards creaked as she left the room, each sound echoing her shame. Downstairs, the house looked the same, but everything inside her had shifted, a line crossed that could never be erased. When Daniel returned that afternoon, he kissed her cheek, distracted and unaware. You look tired, he said casually. I didn't sleep much, she replied, voice steady only by force. That night, Richard sent the first message. You left too soon. She didn't reply. But when her phone lit up again, I can't stop thinking about you, her breath caught. She turned it face down, but the words stayed in her mind, echoing louder in the rain that began again outside. By the end of the week, there were calls, short, hushed, reckless. And when she saw him next, her heart betrayed her all over again. The storm hadn't ended. It had only moved inside her. The morning after her third secret meeting with Richard, Emily woke before sunrise. The air in the guest house felt heavy, thick with the scent of rain-soaked wood. She sat on the edge of the bed, her pulse steady but her chest tight, the kind of ache that comes from carrying something that refuses to stay hidden. Daniel stirred beside her, reaching for her hand. She flinched. He opened his eyes slowly. You're up early again. I couldn't sleep. He smiled faintly, still half asleep. You used to hate mornings. I still do, she whispered. He didn't notice her shaking hands as she poured coffee. The lies were getting easier, and that frightened her most. Each smile, each casual word was a mask she'd learned to wear. But underneath, her thoughts kept circling back to Richard. The messages, the stolen hours, the memory of rain against the skin. By noon, Daniel was gone again. Another meeting, another excuse. Emily stood by the window, staring toward the main house. She could see the faint outline of Richard's study through the trees. A light flickered on. He was there, watching, maybe waiting. Her phone buzzed. Come over. Just for a minute. She typed back, it's too risky. Daniel's mother's old gardener is working outside. Then meet me in the greenhouse. He replied, no one goes there anymore. Her heart pounded as she slipped on her coat. The ground was still wet from the night's rain, the path muddy. The greenhouse loomed like a forgotten secret, glass panels fogged with age. Richard was waiting inside, his figure outlined in pale light. You shouldn't have called me, she said, breathless. I needed to see you. He stepped closer. You've been avoiding me. Because someone will find out, she hissed. Because this is insane. He smiled faintly, but there was something darker behind it now, something that wasn't love but ownership. I don't care if they find out. Well, I do, she said, voice shaking. You don't understand what you're risking. He touched her face, gently at first, then firmer, like he needed to prove she was real. You'll come tonight, he said softly. You always do. Her silence was answer enough. As she slipped back toward the guest house, she saw movement near the fence, a woman trimming rose bushes, pausing mid-cut. Julia, the neighbor, middle-aged, precise, and sharp-eyed. Emily's breath caught. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second before Julia smiled. Polite, curious, lingering too long. "Morning, Emily," she called. "Out for a walk?" "Yes," Emily replied quickly, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Couldn't sleep?" Julia nodded. Strange weather for wandering. Her tone was casual, but her gaze wasn't. It lingered on Emily's muddy shoes, on the greenhouse in the distance. Emily forced a laugh. "Just needed air." "Of course," Julia said, turning back to her roses. But Emily could feel her still watching. Back inside, she scrubbed her hands clean, trembling. Every lie was becoming a thread in a web she couldn't escape. That night, when Daniel returned, she tried to act normal. Dinner, conversation, laughter that sounded like echoes of a life that wasn't hers anymore. But when he leaned in to kiss her goodnight, his hand hesitated on her arm. "You've been distant lately," he said quietly. She froze. "Just tired." He studied her face for a moment too long. "You sure that's all?" "Of course," she whispered, smiling just enough to end the conversation. As Daniel drifted asleep, Emily lay awake, staring at the faint line of light under the door, the reflection of her phone screen lighting up again and again. "I miss you. I need you. Tomorrow." Outside, a figure stood across the garden. Julia, her silhouette faint in the moonlight, watching the house. Morning light slipped through the curtains in thin, cold stripes. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her phone still in her hand from the night before. 3 unread messages from Richard, all short, all possessive. "You can't ignore me forever. I won't let you." She deleted them quickly, her fingers trembling. The guilt had become constant now, a dull ache beneath her ribs that no amount of denial could soothe. Downstairs, Daniel was packing for another day at the office. The sound of his shoes on the hardwood was steady, ordinary, the rhythm of a man who still believed in the illusion of their marriage. "You've been quiet lately," he said, not looking at her. "I've just been tired," she murmured, the same lie she'd been telling him for weeks. He nodded absently, kissed her cheek, and left. The door closed with a hollow thud that made the silence louder. Emily made coffee, tried to read, failed. The clock ticked, cruel and deliberate. Every minute seemed to press down harder. Around noon, the doorbell rang, sudden, sharp, startling. No one ever visited. She opened the door to find a delivery man standing in the drizzle, holding a small envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Hale," he said. Her name, no return address, no sender. But she recognized the handwriting instantly. Sharp, bold, deliberate. Richard's. Her stomach dropped. "Who sent this?" "Don't know, ma'am. Was told to hand it to you directly." She thanked him mechanically, shut the door, and stood there for a moment, frozen. Then she tore it open. Inside was a single folded letter, thick cream paper, the ink bleeding faintly through. The first line made her blood turn to ice. "If you walk away, I'll tell him everything." Her eyes blurred as she read on. "You belong to me now, Emily. You made me believe again, and I won't lose that. If he finds out, it won't be my shame, it'll be yours." Beneath the threat, the words grew tender, disturbingly so. He wrote about her scent, the way she whispered his name, how her absence left him hollow. Love and control blended into one suffocating obsession. Emily's breath quickened. Her hands shook as she crushed the letter, ready to throw it into the fire. But before she could, the sound of the front door startled her. Daniel's voice. "Forgot my briefcase." Panic hit like electricity. She shoved the letter back into the envelope, stuffed it deep into her purse, and forced herself to breathe. Daniel entered, smiling faintly. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said too fast. Just startled. He picked up his case from the table, glancing around absently, until something white caught his eye. A corner of the envelope had slipped from her bag, pale against the dark floor. "What's that?" he asked casually, bending down before she could react. "Nothing," she snapped too quickly. Daniel straightened, the envelope in his hand, his brow furrowed. You look like you've seen a ghost. Daniel, please, just give it back. But he was already turning it over, frowning at the handwriting. Who's Richard writing to? Her blood went cold. Give it to me, she said softly, stepping forward. He looked at her for a long moment, confusion turning to realization, then disbelief. Emily, what is this? It's nothing. Please. He tore it open. The sound was deafening. Paper ripping, her world splitting apart. His eyes scanned the first few lines. The color drained from his face. The silence stretched unbearable. I can explain, she whispered, voice breaking. Daniel's voice was low, trembling. How long? Daniel. How long? He roared, the words trembling with betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to stop it. He stared at her like she was someone he'd never known. You slept with my father. She couldn't breathe. I'm sorry, she choked out. Please, it's over. He laughed, bitter, hollow. Over? You really think anything end with him? He held up the letter, shaking. He doesn't love you, Emily. He owns you. He threw it onto the table, the paper fluttering like a dying thing. Then he walked out. No shouting, no slamming this time. Just silence so final it hurt. Emily stood there until her knees gave way. She sank to the floor, the letter beside her. The ink seemed to blur under the light, as if even the words were ashamed. Her phone buzzed. We need to talk. Tonight. She looked toward the window. Rain had begun to fall again. Slow, deliberate, tracing thin, trembling lines down the glass. The candle was gone, swallowed by the storm's darkness. Only the faint pulse of lightning through the windows gave the room its shape. Flashes of blue-white light, revealing two motionless silhouettes. Evan's voice broke that silence. She wasn't supposed to die, he said softly. Clara's breath caught. You said it was an accident. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the room. It was, but accidents don't happen without choices. And I made mine. Thunder boomed again and she flinched. He didn't seem to notice. I loved her, he continued. God, I love her more than anything. Her name was Leah. We met at a grief support group. She'd lost her brother. I'd lost my father. We were both broken. That's what drew us together. He looked up, his eyes glassy in the flickering dark. Do you know what it's like to see your pain in someone else? To recognize it, like a mirror that finally tells the truth. Clara swallowed hard. Yes, she whispered. He smiled faintly, almost tenderly. I thought she'd heal me. But people like us, we don't heal. We just pass our pain around, hoping someone stronger will carry it for a while. She said nothing. The air between them felt heavy, electric. One night, he said, she told me she was leaving, said I was too much, that I scared her sometimes. I begged her to stay. She started her car, crying, wouldn't even look at me. I followed. I just wanted to talk. His hands trembled in the candle's ghost glow. She drove too fast. I was right behind her. Then her car swerved off the road. I saw the headlights vanish down the embankment. A pause. Only the sound of rain and his uneven breathing. I went down there, he whispered. I found the car upside down, half submerged. I could have called for help, but I froze. I just stood there, watching the water rise around her. Clara's stomach turned. You let her drown? His jaw tightened. I told myself it was too late, that she was already gone. But truth is, he looked at her now, eyes burning. I didn't try. I wanted her to suffer for leaving me, just for a moment. A chill rippled through her. The storm outside seemed to echo every word. And now, she managed to say. Now, he breathed. I can't stop seeing her face. Every night, every time I close my eyes. Her hands against the glass, the look. She was still alive when I walked away. Lightning flared, illuminating the room. The desperation carved into his face, the horror frozen in hers. Why tell me this? Clara asked, her voice trembling. He leaned closer, voice low, intimate. Because when I saw you online, you looked just like her. The same eyes, the same silence. I thought maybe she came back as you, to give me another chance. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. You think I'm her? I know you're not, he said quickly, though his tone carried doubt. But when you opened the door, it felt like she was forgiving me through you. Clara forced herself to stand, every instinct screaming run. Evan, you need help. This isn't forgiveness. It's obsession. He rose too, calm but intense. You don't understand. I came here to confess. Not to a priest. Not to police. To you. Because only someone who's been broken can understand another broken soul. Her pulse raced. You should go. He didn't move. Say you forgive me, he whispered. I can't. Just say it. His voice cracked, thunder echoing his shout. She stumbled back. Evan, stop. But he collapsed instead, falling to his knees, sobbing. Please, I just need to hear it once. That I'm not a monster. Clara hesitated. In his eyes she saw both guilt and madness, pain and yearning. Against every rational thought, pity stirred. I don't know what you are, she whispered, but you're not beyond saving. Maybe that's enough. He looked up at her, hope flickering faintly, dangerously. Then there's still time, he said. For what? Lightning flashed. His answer came soft, chilling. To make things right. Outside, the storm began to calm. Inside, the silence felt sharper. Clara didn't yet realize. This was the quiet before the real violence began. Morning came gray and heavy. The storm finally spent, but leaving behind a silence that felt wrong. The world outside glistened with the aftermath. Puddles like mirrors, trees bending under the weight of soaked leaves. Emily woke to that silence, the kind that presses against your chest until you can hardly breathe. The study door was still ajar. She found Richard's glass on the desk, half full, the amber liquid darkened with dust. The carpet still bore faint smears of blood, a reminder the night before. But Richard himself was gone. His chair sat pushed back slightly, one arm of it streaked with something that looked like mud. His coat was missing from the rack. So were his keys. For a moment, Emily thought maybe he'd driven into town early, perhaps to cool off, or to chase after Daniel. But then she saw the clock on the wall. It was nearly noon. No message. No call. No sound of the familiar engine. Her chest tightened. She dialed his number, more out of habit than hope. It went straight to voicemail. His voice, calm and controlled even in recording, filled the room. Leave a message. She hung up before the tone. Daniel hadn't come home either. The hours passed like years. Emily wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, replaying the fight in her mind. Every word, every look, every drop of blood. She made tea, didn't drink it. The house felt cavernous, echoing with ghosts of conversations she wished she could erase. By evening, the anxiety had turned to dread. She drove the long gravel road to the main gate, peering into the woods on either side. No sign of tire tracks, no broken branches. The rain had washed everything clean, too clean. She returned home, called Daniel's office. The receptionist said he hadn't shown up that morning, hadn't called in either. 2 days passed. The silence became unbearable. On the second night, sitting alone in the dim kitchen, Emily finally called the police. The officer on the line was calm, detached, as if disappearance was just another box to tick. When was the last time you saw him? Friday night, she said, around midnight. And you waited 48 hours to report it? Her throat tightened. I thought he needed space. We had an argument. With your husband? She hesitated. With his son. There was a pause. The officer cleared his throat. We'll send someone to take a statement. When the patrol car finally arrived, its flashing lights painted the wet driveway blue and red. 2 officers walked to the house, taking notes, asking questions that made her stomach twist. Any signs of struggle? Any reason he might leave suddenly? Emily lied, not out of malice, but fear. No, he was upset, but not violent. She didn't mention the broken decanter. She didn't mention the blood. She didn't mention that she'd heard something the night after the fight, a sound that had clawed into her dreams ever since. It had been around 2 a.m. She'd woken to the soft slam of a car door. Then voices, low, urgent, impossible to distinguish through the rain. A muffled thud, a short cry, and then silence. She'd assumed it was a storm, or maybe her guilt playing tricks. Now she wasn't sure. After the officers left, the house felt emptier than ever. The clock ticked too loudly. Every shadow looked like him. That night, Emily stood at the window, staring into the dark stretch of the drive. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the trees. Somewhere beyond the fields, a single light flickered, the kind that might belong to a car left abandoned or something worse. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, whispering to no one. "Where are you?" In the distance, thunder rolled again, faint, reluctant, like an echo of everything that refused to stay buried. And far off in the woods, unseen by her, something moved. The storm was gone by dawn, but its silence felt heavier than thunder. Pale morning light crept through the half-drawn curtains, spilling across the room, across the shards of glass, the overturned chair, and the man lying motionless on her floor. Evan Miles was dead. Clara stood frozen at the edge of the room, her mind refusing to process what her eyes already knew. His skin was gray now, his body stiffening, the faint glint of spilled wine dark against the rug like blood. For a moment, everything inside her went still. Then came the shaking. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled for her phone. "Call 911. Just call 911. She pressed the numbers wrong twice before the call finally connected. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" Her voice came out strangled. There's a man in my house. I think he's dead. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Is he breathing?" She looked again, chest unmoving, eyes half open. "No, he's not. Do you know him?" Clara hesitated. The truth tangled in her throat. He came over last night. We were talking, then he just collapsed. I didn't. "Ma'am, I'm dispatching paramedics and officers to your location. Stay where you are." She dropped the phone, collapsing against the wall, pulling her knees close. The faint hum of the line still filled the air like static. The clock on the wall ticked slow and cruel. Each second stretched like an accusation. When the sirens finally echoed down her street, she almost cried in relief. Red and blue lights spilled across the living room walls. The door burst open. Paramedics rushed in first, their voices brisk, controlled. "Male, mid-30s, unresponsive," one of them said. "Check pulse." The other knelt beside Evan, fingers on his neck. Nothing. They worked fast, compressions, oxygen, a flash of defibrillator pads. Clara watched, numb, as his body jerked under the electric shock. Once, twice, then one of them shook his head. Time of death, 7:14 a.m. The words echoed through the room like a verdict. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh, my God!" The paramedic stood, lowering his gloves. "Ma'am, did you witness what happened?" He fell," she stammered. "We were talking, and then he started shaking, and..." He nodded gently, but his eyes had that look, professional distance, quiet skepticism. Minutes later, the police arrived. Uniforms filled her doorway, boots squeaking on the wet floor. A detective stepped forward, tall, composed, a pen already poised over his notepad. "Clara Evans?" She nodded weakly. "I'm Detective Harris. I understand you found the body." "I didn't find it," she whispered. "He was here all night. We were drinking. Then he collapsed." "Did he say anything before that happened?" "He said he wanted to make things right." Harris raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't think to call for help until this morning?" Her throat tightened. "It happened late. The storm knocked out power. I didn't know what to do." He studied her for a moment, eyes sharp but unreadable. "We'll need you to stay for questioning." Behind him, a forensic tech photographed the room. Every shattered glass, every stain on the floor. Another officer bagged the empty wine bottle, marking it with a yellow tag. Clara watched as they zipped the black body bag close around Evan's face. A sound escaped her, a soft, broken gasp she didn't even recognize as her own. As they carried him out, The paramedic brushed past her. "We'll need a full statement," he said. She nodded numbly, eyes fixed on the space where his body had been. Her home, once quiet, was now crawling with strangers, cameras, and whispered questions. When the door finally shut and the sirens faded, only one thought cut through her fog. He came here for forgiveness. Now she was the one who needed it. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Emily woke to the sound of sirens outside the house and the sharp knock of police at her door. The fog had barely lifted from the fields when 2 detectives stepped into her kitchen, the same ones who had questioned her after Richard's death. But this time, their expressions were different. Confident, certain. "Mrs. Turner," Detective Hale began, setting a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a flash drive. "We've obtained something from your late father-in-law's study, a security recording from a night before he died." Emily's stomach turned cold. "Recording?" she repeated. "From when?" "The evening of the 21st, Hale said. Roughly 11:30 p.m. We believe it captured your final interaction with Richard Turner." Her hands trembled. She remembered that night. The storm, the shouting, the whiskey on his breath, the way he cornered her near the desk. But a recording? How? "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "He never mentioned." Hale glanced at his partner, then slid a laptop toward her. "You should hear for yourself." The file opened with static. Then Richard's voice, sharp and slurred. "You can't just walk away from this, Emily." Her own voice followed, high, strained, desperate. "I can't do this anymore, Richard. It's over. If you leave me, I'll destroy everything you have." A pause, the sound of something breaking. And then her scream, unmistakable, raw, echoing through the room. "You'll ruin everything." The recording cut to silence. Emily stared at the screen, unable to breathe. It sounded damning. A fight, a threat, her anger. She tried to explain. "He was drunk. He was shouting at me. I pushed him away, that's all." The detectives exchanged a look. Hale closed the laptop. "We'll need you to come down to the station. Just routine questions." By the afternoon, the story had spread. The small town that once whispered politely now spoke her name with venom. The mistress, the murderer, the woman who seduced a father and destroyed a family. Outside the police station, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Emily shielded her face, her heart pounding as she was escorted inside. She could feel the eyes on her, the judgment, the neighbors who once smiled now turning away when she passed. Even Julia, the ever-watchful neighbor, was quoted in the papers. "I always thought something was strange about her," she'd said. "Those late-night walks, the lights in the greenhouse." By evening, Daniel appeared at the station, not as a husband, but as someone she barely recognized. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression hollow. "They found a recording," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, voice flat. "Everyone knows." She reached for him. "Daniel, please, you have to believe me." He stepped back. "Believe you? After everything? After him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He was blackmailing me. He wrote letters." "I saw the letters," he cut in. "He didn't force you to answer them." His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, detached. "Do you realize what they're saying about you? About us? They think you killed him." "I didn't," she cried. "You have to tell them what really happened that night." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What I saw was you screaming at him, running for his house just before midnight. What am I supposed to tell them?" She stared at him, realization dawning. "You're not defending me, are you?" He didn't answer. The silence told her everything. When she was released hours later, the street outside was lined with people. Reporters, neighbors, strangers. Someone threw a crumpled newspaper at her feet. The headline read, "Affair, Lies, and Murder. The Turner Scandal Deepens." Back home, the walls seemed to close in. She unplugged the phone, shut every curtain, and sat in the dark. But the sound of that recording wouldn't leave her. Her own scream, replaying in her head again and again, had become her punishment. That night, as thunder rolled once more across the valley, she thought she heard his voice again. Not from the river this time, but from inside the house. You'll ruin everything. She pressed her hands to her ears, whispering into the dark. You already did. Outside, a car engine started. Daniel's. And as his headlights disappeared into the storm, Emily realized the investigation wasn't the only thing closing in. Her marriage was gone too, leaving only guilt, silence, and the echo of her own voice condemning her. The courthouse smelled of rain and bleach, cold, sterile, unforgiving. Emily sat at the defendant's table, wrists trembling under the table's edge. The recording, the letters, the whispers, everything had led to this moment. Above her, the ceiling fans hummed like an endless reminder that the world was still moving, even as hers had stopped. When the judge entered, the crowd fell silent. Daniel sat in the second row, his expression unreadable, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He hadn't spoken to her since the night of the arrest. Their eyes met only once, briefly, long enough for her to see something colder than anger, distance. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Keller, began without hesitation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a story of love gone wrong. This is a story of control, manipulation, and murder. He turned toward her, voice rising. The defendant, Emily Turner, engaged in a secret, destructive affair with her husband's father. When the truth threatened to surface, she silenced him permanently. The courtroom buzzed. Emily clenched her fists, trying to breathe. Her lawyer, a weary man named Pierce, leaned toward her. Don't react. Let him paint his picture. We'll draw ours. But each word Keller spoke was a blade. The letters were displayed, the photographs, the time-stamped texts. And then, finally, the recording. Her voice filled the room. You'll ruin everything. It echoed off the walls like confession. Emily felt herself shrinking with each replay. The jurors looked at her differently now, not as a grieving woman, but as something darker. Pierce rose slowly for the defense. That recording doesn't prove murder, he said evenly. It proves emotion, fear, desperation. Emily Turner was being blackmailed, manipulated by a man who abused his power. She tried to break free, and when he died, she became his final victim. He motioned toward her gently. You'll hear from her today. You'll hear the truth. Emily's heart pounded as she took the stand. The microphone felt too close, the air too thin. Mrs. Turner, Pierce began, did you kill Richard Turner? Her voice cracked. No, I didn't. What happened that night? She closed her eyes, remembering the storm. He called me to his study. He was drunk, angry. He said he'd tell Daniel everything unless I came back to him. I told him it was over. He grabbed my arm and I pushed him away. He fell. Her breath hitched. He hit his head on the corner of the desk. I tried to help, but he wasn't moving. I panicked. I ran. Keller stood. So you left a man bleeding on the floor and didn't call for help? I was scared, she whispered. Scared or guilty, he pressed. I didn't mean for him to die, she cried, voice breaking. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Keller turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, intent or not, this woman's actions led directly to Richard Turner's death. And her lies, her affair, her manipulation, they tell you exactly who she is. Pierce objected. Character assassination is not evidence. Withdrawn, Keller said smoothly, but the damage was done. From the stand, Emily caught Daniel's gaze again. His expression wavered. Not forgiveness, not yet, but uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, he looked like a man who didn't know what to believe. Hours bled into days. Witnesses came and went. Julia testified next, her tone clipped and careful. I saw her near the greenhouse the night before he disappeared, she said. She looked frightened. Keller smiled thinly. Frightened or guilty? I can't say, Julia replied, eyes flicking briefly toward Emily. But she wasn't the same woman after that. When the closing statements ended, the room hung heavy with exhaustion. Keller's voice rang final. Passion, jealousy, fear, it all ends the same, with blood. Then it was over. The jury filed out. Hours passed. The rain outside turned from a drizzle to a storm again, Echoing the night, everything began. When the verdict came, Emily stood. Her knees almost gave out as the foreman spoke. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The words sank like stones. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Daniel bowed his head, one tear slipping free, the only one she'd ever see. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted. Reporters whispering, cameras flashing, voices blending into a storm of noise. But all Emily heard was the echo of the judge's final words. Emily Turner is hereby sentenced to 15 years in state prison. When she was led away, she looked back once. Daniel was still seated, hands trembling. Their eyes met, not in love, not in hate, but in something far heavier. The truth had come too late, and somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew it. The verdict echoed long after the courtroom emptied. 15 years. Daniel heard again and again, a loop that refused to stop. Outside, rain fell in thin, slanted lines, painting the courthouse steps in silver streaks. He stood there for a long time, soaked through, watching as they led Emily away in handcuffs. She didn't look back this time. For weeks after the trial, the town seemed quieter, not in peace, but in judgment. Whispers trailed him everywhere he went. At the grocery store, on the street, in the church pews. The son of the woman who killed her lover. He stopped going out entirely. The house, now as alone, creaked like a living thing. Every door hinge, every loose floorboard sounded like memory. He couldn't step into the study without feeling his chest tighten. The blood had been cleaned long ago, but he still saw it. A dark smear near the corner of the desk, right where his father had fallen. Daniel began to drink, first to sleep, then to forget. It never worked. One night, months later, he found himself sitting in that same study again. The whiskey bottle sat half empty beside the old recorder, the one that had destroyed everything. He pressed play without meaning to. Her voice filled the room once more. "You'll ruin everything." And then his father's, cruel, mocking. "You already did." But this time, Daniel didn't flinch. He just listened until his own voice broke through the static. It was faint, buried under the noise, but unmistakable. "Stop it." He froze. The realization hit like a second death. He'd been there. That night, he hadn't dreamed it. He'd come down the stairs when he'd heard the shouting. He'd seen Emily crying, his father grabbing her arm. He'd stepped between them, yelling, shoving, and when Richard had swung at him, he'd struck back. Just once. A single, furious punch that sent his father staggering into the desk. The sound of the impact had echoed through the house like thunder. Emily had screamed. He'd run. And then nothing. Daniel gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. "It was me," he whispered. "Not her." The words came out trembling, fragile. He said them again, louder this time. "It was me." The empty house swallowed his voice whole. No one answered. No one ever would. He tried to write it down, a confession, a statement, anything that could undo what had been done. But when he looked at the paper, the words blurred. How do you confess to killing your own father when the woman you love is already paying for it? He tore the paper in half, then again, until nothing remained but a handful of scraps. Days turned into nights. The bottle emptied and refilled. His reflection in the mirror grew thinner, older, hollow. Sometimes he saw Emily's face in his dreams, not angry, not pleading, just tired. She'd stopped sending letters weeks ago. He couldn't blame her. One evening, he stumbled outside into the yard, barefoot and shaking. The autumn wind bit through his shirt. He looked up at the house, the windows dark, the walls silent, and felt something inside him collapse. "I killed him," he whispered into the night. "I killed my father." The wind carried his words away, scattering them across the fields. He laughed then, a broken, bitter sound, and sank to his knees. No one would ever know. By the time dawn came, Daniel was asleep on the porch steps, the confession still echoing faintly in his dreams. Somewhere, a phone rang in the empty house, unanswered, insistent. It was the prison calling. Emily had stopped eating. The road back to the house was overgrown now, half swallowed by weeds and silence. Daniel hadn't driven this way in more than 15 years. The steering wheel trembled beneath his fingers as the old gates came into view, rusted, leaning, half consumed by ivy. The paint that once gleamed white was now the dull gray of neglect. He parked just short of the front steps, letting the engine die. For a long moment, he sat still, listening to the ticking metal as the car cooled. It was strange how sound could feel like memory. The echo of rain, the whisper of a woman's voice, the dull thud of something hitting wood. He took a breath and stepped out. The air smelled of damp soil and decay. Autumn leaves blanketed the porch. When he pushed the front door open, it protested with a low, drawn-out groan. Inside, the house greeted him like a ghost unsure of its own name. Dust motes drifted through shafts of light from cracked windows, turning everything into a haze of gray. The living room looked smaller now. The couch was still there, draped in a yellowed sheet. The clock on the wall had stopped, its hands frozen at 11:57. The night everything broke. Daniel moved slowly, tracing his hand along the banister as he climbed the stairs. Each step creaked, as if remembering him. He paused outside the study door, the room he had avoided even in dreams. The brass handle was cold against his palm. Inside, time had stood still. The desk remained where it had always been, though its surface was buried under a layer of dust thick enough to write in. He did. One word. Sorry. The chair was still slightly turned, the way it had been when they found Richard's body. Daniel stared at it for a long time. His reflection in the window looked almost like his father's. The same tired eyes, the same lines at the corners. It unsettled him. He reached for the recorder on the desk, the same one that had ruined Emily's life. The buttons had rusted, but it still clicked when he pressed play. Static, then faintly her voice, crying, pleading lost. He turned it off before the next sound came. He couldn't bear to hear himself again. Downstairs, the house seemed to breathe with him. The pipes rattled. The wind sighed through the chimney. Somewhere, a door shifted slightly, as if moved by unseen hands. In the kitchen, he found the old photograph, framed, lying face down on the counter. He lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. It was from years ago, that first dinner, when Emily had joined them. She was smiling nervously, seated between father and son. Richard's arm rested casually along the back of her chair. Daniel's smile was genuine then, before suspicion, before betrayal, before blood. He set the photograph upright on the table, as though returning something that had been missing. The late afternoon light slanted to the broken blinds, washing the room in a pale gold glow. Daniel poured himself a glass of water from the tap. It ran brown for a moment before clearing. He sipped and looked out the window at the overgrown garden where he used to play as a child. Emily had written him once, years after the conviction. The letter was short. I forgive you. Don't come for me. He never replied. Now, standing in the quiet ruin of everything they had shared, he understood why. Forgiveness wasn't freedom. It was a sentence of its own. He placed the empty glass beside the photograph and turned toward the door. The house felt lighter somehow, as if acknowledging his presence one last time. On his way out, he paused at the threshold and looked back. The fading light caught the edges of the photograph, the three of them forever frozen in that single moment of false peace. Daniel closed the door gently behind him. Outside, the sky burned orange, and the wind stirred the leaves like restless ghosts. He walked to the car without looking back again. And in the empty house, the clock ticked once, just once, before falling silent forever.